delighted to see so many people here tonight. My name is Carissa. I'm with American Farmland Trust. We have an extraordinary program this evening. This is my first time on the island, so I am overwhelmed by just the warmth and generosity that our partners who are here have shown us. I want to just call out and thank with all of my heart Sarah Johnson. She's been our extraordinary, thank you Sarah for hosting us. Thank you for helping us to get to Nantucket. We are so grateful to you. I also want to thank our delightful friends at Remain. They provided the food and the drink this evening. I can't wait to check that out. That's off to this side. Thank you, Remain. And additionally, our partners, Sustainable Nantucket and the Nantucket Land Bank, have made this event what it is tonight, which means there are so many folks in the room to hear about our work and to hear about the amazing work that's happening on Nantucket and elsewhere. So without further ado, I am delighted to welcome Rachel Freeman from the Land Bank.
Hi, my name is Rachel Freeman, and I work for the Nantucket Islands Land Bank, and I just want to point out one thing. I was the Director of Operational Resources up until today, basically. So that's a little bit of an error. I'm now the Interim Executive Director. So just to clarify that. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. First off, I want to thank the American Farmland Trust for inviting the Land Bank here tonight in collaboration with Remain and Sustainable Nantucket. And I'm here tonight particularly to talk about the extensive Nantucket agricultural history that we have on this island. It's amazing, and I'm just going to touch on a few of the highlights because I have about 7 minutes to talk. And then I'm going to be talking about where the Land Bank is today with their agricultural programming. To start off, I feel like it would be completely remiss not to honor the fact that the English settlers weren't actually the first farmers on Nantucket. The Native Americans, particularly the Wampanoag tribe, farmed on Nantucket for thousands of years before the English settlers arrived in 1659. The traditional Wampanoag garden that's kind of well known is the Three Sisters Garden, which is squash and beans and corn or maize. And what's interesting about these three plants is they actually grow incredibly well together. They're beneficials, and the other thing about them is that they are nutritionally complementary, so they can sort of support a diet in and of themselves. So the Wampanoags actually are the ones who taught the English settlers to farm when they first came here. They taught them to put a fish under the plants for fertilizer. They taught them how to grow the Three Sisters Garden because, you know, that's what they knew and had relied on for generations here, and it worked. Unfortunately, basically when the English settlers arrived on Nantucket, they colonized the island starting in 1659, and by around the 1700s and the mid-1700s, they'd really taken over most of the island and forced the Wampanoag off their land. In addition to that, they really brought with them novel germs and disease, so the population was decimated by the mid-1700s. Let's see, and it's an unfortunate story, but I think it's just amazing to honor that culture. So once the English settlers arrived, they started farming again from the Wampanoag, but then they almost immediately began expanding. They started importing seeds and looking at, planting traditional New England crops and traditional English crops. They also brought with them sheep, and they were raising poultry and livestock and harvesting salt marsh hay that they were using for bedding and for forage. And they also built grain mills and fulling mills on the island as well. So they were rapidly expanding this agrarian society or agricultural society. Although farming is the main goal of my talk, and that's what you're looking at here tonight, whaling was actually a huge part of the Nantucket economy, which everyone I'm sure is familiar with. So up until around the 1850s, the economy was completely dominated by whaling. Though I will admit that during that time, it was absolutely necessary for settlers to be farming. That was a huge part of their survival, and it was really what the basis of their economy was, underpinning things like whaling. Once the whaling declined in 1850, it was really interesting. Everyone kind of fell back on farming. And you saw that farming gradually increased until around 1875 when we had almost 100 farms on the island. And it was a huge part of the economy and the culture. During that time, I think I have to point out, according to Jamie Pottern from the American Farmland Trust, I have to point out how important sheep are. Because sheep really are a huge cultural impact on this island. They're not only a cultural impact, they're an ecological impact. So we had upwards of 15,000 sheep grazing all around town, outside of town, in sort of undivided common lands all over Nantucket in 1845. And they grazed in these areas for close to 200 years. And what you ended up with were these amazing kind of pastoral landscapes that everyone knows these days and loves for Nantucket on the South Shore and the sandplain grasslands and heathlands. And not only are they culturally important, but they're incredibly ecologically valuable habitats. As we continue on into the 1900s, basically farming started to decline. And it was almost completely corresponding that as farming was declining, what was increasing was the tourist industry. And by the 1960s, we'd really had a decrease in the number of farms on the island because most of the large farms had been broken up into smaller parcels for development. And that was when we really started to see the downfall of, well, not the downfall, but the decline in farming on Nantucket. However, even though Nantucket agriculture declined, there's 3 amazing generational family farms that have persisted on Nantucket for many, many years. I'd like to honor the Bartletts first, Ocean View Farm. They have the largest farm on Nantucket today. And it's fun, actually. I see John Bartlett in the audience. They have been farming since 1843, and as far as we know, they are a 7th generation farm. And it's incredibly impressive that they've been able to sustain through all the ups and downs and the incredible value increases of property on Nantucket. Tom and Nick Larrabee are a 5th generation farm, so the Larrabee family, and they have recently started a new farm, my grandfather's farm, but they've been farming for generations on the island in various forms, and they are also here tonight, which is super exciting. Prior to my grandfather's farm, and actually they are still involved, they were overseeing the Conservation Foundation's cranberry bogs, and you'd have to talk to them more about what they did before that. I am related to Steve Slosick, and so that's my father-in-law. And they are a 2nd generation farm. Moorzen Farm is a produce farm, but before that, his father actually ran a dairy on the island on the same property. So similarly, they've actually been generationally farming on Nantucket since I'm not sure exactly, 40s, 50s. But these are 3 farms that have really persisted and are fantastic to have on Nantucket. In addition to those 3 farms, there's probably 10 to 15 other small commercial operations on the island, and some of those are on land bank property and some of them are not. This is kind of the history of land bank agricultural acquisitions. The land bank, just so you know, has 3 pillars to its mission: recreation, conservation, and agriculture. For a long time, agriculture has been, just by chance, the smallest component, both land-wise and in terms of effort at the land bank. And about 3 years ago, the commission decided that they really wanted to change that. So they sent staff away with the goal of really starting to look at what role could the land bank play in agriculture on Nantucket. As you can see here, the land bank started in 1997 with the 25-acre purchase of Mount Vernon Farm on Hummock Pond Road, and they've continued purchasing land over time. Within the last 3 years, there's been a bit of an uptick. In addition to this, we actually just finalized a community garden project off Old South Road, and we licensed to a number of organizations, actually, we licensed to the Nantucket Community Garden and Sustainable, and then a number of commercial farms. And we also hold a 25-acre agricultural preservation restriction. So in considering how we were going to move forward with our agricultural programming, that's where we started to reach out to the American Farmland Trust, and this partnership was formed. The American Farmland Trust helped us to say, what is important for farming on Nantucket? How can we participate? What makes sense? And basically what they've been doing since we started working together 3 years ago is helping us define our role in agriculture and then fostering the ways that we can actually support that role. So we've done things like create an agricultural policy. We've worked on license agreements with farmers. And just recently we designed an agricultural specialist job description and advertisement that will be going out shortly. So we'll have an agricultural specialist on the land bank staff, which will be an amazing liaison for local farmers. So as I was saying, we've really been working hard in the past few years to think through what makes sense for the land bank. And Jamie's going to be talking quite a bit about some of the research she did on Nantucket and what she found out when she talked to local farmers and stakeholders. And we're using that information to figure out, what does make sense. And over time, I picture this will evolve, but for now, we've made some good headway, and I'm excited to see what comes in the future. It would be completely remiss of me to not honor the rest of the organizations that are involved in food systems on Nantucket, because that is a way bigger discussion, and local agriculture is just one piece of that puzzle. So these are all of the dedicated members and community members and organizations who are playing roles in this topic and trying to address what food systems on Nantucket look like now and should look like, and what does a healthy community look like from the perspective of food for our island. So without further ado, I am going to bring up Jamie Pottern.
Can you give another round of applause for Rachel? That was an amazing presentation. And she got that big news today, so she has a lot on her mind. All right, well, I'm so glad that we started with that agricultural history. As Rachel said, my name is Jamie Pottern. I'm the New England Program Manager at the American Farmland Trust. And I've had the really distinct privilege over the last 3 years of getting to work really closely with Rachel and folks at the Land Bank, and getting to talk to many of you here in the room. One of the first things I did when Rachel asked me to come aboard and to start advising the Land Bank on their ag program was, since I am not from Nantucket and I did not know much about Nantucket agriculture, I talked to many of you. So I had virtual interviews with many of the farmers and food businesses, land bank commissioners, other stakeholders on the island, and I was able to really learn a lot about what some of the challenges and opportunities are for Nantucket agriculture. And was here last fall and got to visit with many of you. And Matt kindly hosted us in his barn, which is that picture in the bottom left. I got to present out on some of the findings and sort of preliminary recommendations of things I was hearing from many of you, and got to present as well before the Nantucket Land Bank Commission. So for those of you who don't know about American Farmland Trust, John's going to go a lot more into what AFT is and what we do, but you may have seen our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We have some in the back there. Please take some with you. But really quick, high level, AFT is a nonprofit agricultural land trust. We've been around since 1980. And our mission is to protect the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. And we do that in lots of different ways, which I'm not going to go into. But one of the ways we do that is by helping to produce really important research about some of the current and future threats to this country's farmland. So what this map is showing is that sort of that circle there is around New England, and what we're looking at is data from our Farms Under Threat 2040 study. And it's showing that even in New England, we have a lot less farmland than other parts of the country, but unfortunately, we're projected to lose a much higher percentage of the farmland that we do have. And if we zoom into Massachusetts, unfortunately, we rank third in the nation in terms of the percent of our ag land that we're projected to lose by the year 2040. Nearly 15% of our ag land at a business as usual scenario. That unfortunately translates to nearly 74,000 acres of farmland that we're projected to lose in the next 16 years. It's pretty startling, and in fact, that number is interesting because it's this exact same amount of farmland that our State Department of Ag has protected permanently in the last 45 years. We're projected to lose that amount of farmland in the next 16 years. 60% of that could occur on the state's best ag land. As you all know, Massachusetts has some of the highest farmland real estate values in the nation. I don't have to tell you that, you're here on Nantucket. We rank third, unfortunately. And all these things combined really pose some significant challenges for sustaining agriculture. How can the next generation of farmers afford farmland? How can we get the next generation of farmers on the land? So these are really big questions. Again, John's going to talk more about this, but in Massachusetts, one of my jobs is I work in the field of land protection. I'm working with conservation stakeholders all across Massachusetts, trying to support them in understanding the tools to protect farmland. And AFT is also the co-author on the Massachusetts Farmland Action Plan, which recently came out. But we're here on Nantucket, which is part of Massachusetts, obviously. But as you all here in the room know, you can't get there from here, right? It's part of Massachusetts, but it really has its own set of unique challenges. It has challenges that other parts of the state have, but it has others that are unique and others that are really, truly exacerbated here on the island. So I'm going to really quickly run through some of these challenges for Nantucket agriculture, which are things that I learned from talking with many of you, many farmers on the island. And I'm going to run pretty quickly through these. Obviously, cost is the #1 barrier to agriculture that many of you shared with me. The high cost of housing, the high cost of farmland are really prohibitive for farmers. And were it not for the land bank and their role in trying to acquire some of these lands as they go up for sale and make them affordably available to farmers, there would be very little agriculture left on Nantucket. The high cost of infrastructure, inputs, shipping and transportation, labor, all of you farmers know this. It's extremely expensive to farm here. Everything has to come over by boat. Climate change is a serious threat. All of you know this. Our farmers are out there on Nantucket grappling with variable weather, limited growing season, increasing pest and disease pressure, variable or degraded soils, runoff and pollution, more and more flooding events. All of these things are really negatively impacting farmers and putting into question the future viability of some of the island's farms. As Rachel said, we've lost so much farmland on Nantucket. 150 years ago, there were 100 farms. Now there are maybe 15 or 20 or so, as Rachel was saying. So with that loss of farmland, as we all know, when we lose farmland, we often lose some of the other systems that previously existed to sustain a viable food system. So with that loss has come some of the loss of processing and storage infrastructure. There's not really as much year-round food production as historically there was. Therefore, there's limited sales to wholesale markets. And a lot of limited livestock production, as Rachel was saying. There used to be tons of sheep and dairies and other livestock, and there's very limited amount of that still happening on Nantucket. Other challenges that were shared with me is farmers shared they feel like there's a limited public understanding about farming, which can create conflicts with neighbors. They've expressed a need for more communication around regulations for food processing and farmers wanting to do more value-added and creative stuff. They're having some challenges in doing that. Limited ag extension or other support, and I think the ag specialist role that Rachel mentioned that the land bank is about to create is really key, and I'm so excited to hear about that. And some limited dialogue between some agricultural and food stakeholder groups. Some incredible conversations are happening, but others have shared that some of the conversations can be siloed and more need for more communication across sectors. And then lastly, and most importantly, is the significant wealth disparity and food insecurity on Nantucket. All of you are working on this. I don't need to tell you about this, but some of our neighbors here are going hungry. There's a real need to figure out the food insecurity challenge. You're all working on this, but the more we can figure out how to grow more food and support more farmers and enhance agriculture on Nantucket, the more we can start to address the food insecurity challenge. So those are a lot of challenges, but I really want to uplift the things that seem to really be working that many of you shared with me, and Rachel alluded to these as well. Obviously, the things that are working, the incredible assets on Nantucket, are all of you, some incredibly savvy, hardworking farmers, whether they're the generational farms, some of whom are here in the room, or some of the first-generation farmers who are on sustainable land or on other properties, really working hard, having a go at it, producing a lot of delicious and healthy food for the community. You're all part of what's making this system work. And this is a great map. Posey just wanted to include this because I think it's so beautiful. I think it's really illustrative of so many of the farm businesses and farms on the island. Many shared with me that they see the land bank as an incredible asset, including the role that they're doing to create affordable access to farmland and housing. Another asset is that unmet demand for local food. Folks express that, people want to buy more local food. People want to offer local food at the local groceries. They want to have local food in the schools. So there's a real potential to ramp up to meet the demand, especially for those institutional and wholesale markets, as well as to address some of that food insecurity challenge. And then this is a slide Rachel showed, but I'm going to uplift it again, that all of you across these different organizations, across different mission areas, are working on so many different pieces of this across the island, and it's incredible, and you're doing such powerful work. And then lastly, there are so many thoughtful consumers and philanthropists on Nantucket who really want to support local farming and local agriculture. They want to put their money where their mouth is. They want to have access to that local food, and there's a real interest in, from this audience in really wanting to support local agriculture. So I'm going to leave you all with some very high-level recommendations of things that we can all do to secure a more resilient agricultural future on Nantucket. So unsurprisingly, number one is figuring out collectively how we can address more of the affordable housing and farmland challenge. So Land Bank is playing a role, affordable housing organizations are playing a role, so many of you, but really just want to call out that there's so much opportunity here to be really creative. Maybe you're a private landowner and you have an extra house, or you have land that could potentially be farmed, that could be made available to a farm seeker. Perhaps you're an institution or another kind of organization that maybe wouldn't see yourself as having farmland, but perhaps you do, right? So I think as much as we can have these cross-sector conversations and really think about how on an island with a limited land base, we can all be part of the solution, I think some really creative ideas will come to bear. And I just want to call out this critical task. I shared this with the Land Bank last fall, but I really think this activity of doing an island-wide farmland inventory is a really critical task, because it's hard to know what the potential of Nantucket agriculture is without truly understanding, how much farmland was farmed historically, how much of that land could potentially be brought back into viable production. What kind of agriculture are those lands suitable for, right? If we train up more farmers, where are we going to put them? So I think a little bit more of that in-depth analysis of the island's land base and the potential and what could be done, I think will really help to inform more of what the agricultural future on Nantucket could look like. So that's my little plug for that. Number two here is supporting viable, regenerated, and resilient farms. So many of the farmers here are already doing this, right? They're trying to innovate, they're reacting to climate change, growing more food in hoop houses. Land Bank's trying to provide water and power and fencing to address some of the needs of farmers. Y'all are putting compost on the land, but there's so much potential to funnel more resources to really ramp up the resilience piece, right? So with climate change, there's so much more need to help support the viability of farms, whether it's bringing more livestock back into the system to create more of that closed loop system, or doing things like Sustainable's doing, writing grants, trying to get farmers infrastructure that they need. There's so much potential and need to support farmers in adopting these practices. 3 is supporting a diversified, all of us collectively thinking about how to support a diversified year-round agriculture and create and bring back more of that processing and storage infrastructure. So this is already happening. Farmers are already, making soup and jams and jellies, and farmers are growing more of storage crops. Some food processing infrastructure is being created, but if we're going to really try to ramp up to grow more food on the island in a year-round way, we need to think really creatively and how we can funnel resources to really ramp this up to create more of that year-round agricultural system. Number 4 is to support a more farm-friendly regulatory environment, and so I think what that will take is really just more dialogue between the newly revived Ag Commission, the Board of Health, the Planning Department, the Land Bank, folks who have power to make decisions around policies that impact the reality of farmers on the ground, those conversations are really critical. We want to support farmers in being able to do the kind of creative value-added products that they want to make, to build the kind of infrastructure that they need to build to be viable and resilient. Fifth is public support and education. So I think, like we said, some farmers are feeling like the public, members of the public, may not understand what the realities of agriculture are and what it really takes to grow local food. So the more that collectively, the land bank, all the partners can think about how to create more of that public education, how to really ramp up that public support for agriculture, the more folks know and understand, the more understanding that they will be in terms of their farming neighbor and sounds and smells and all the things that they may not understand right now. And then lastly is pretty much what I've been saying this whole time, which is really just the need to keep working together across issue area, coming together across the island. As I mentioned when I was here last fall, hanging out in Matt's barn, some folks remarked that there were some folks in the room who maybe traditionally were not talking to each other or not coming together and strategizing together. And so given the realities that I've presented, given the challenges, and given the tremendous opportunity, the more we can be having really diverse rooms like this and really diverse conversations across issue area to cross-pollinate, to have all different kinds of ideas, the more we can really step up to raise all boats and really, again, try to help address more of that food insecurity challenge on Nantucket. So before I hand it off to John, I'm gonna just leave you with a couple visions that folks I spoke with shared with me in terms of their vision for Nantucket agriculture for the next 20 years. So folks told me that they wanted to see more diversity in agriculture, bringing back rural character, more year-round food options and opportunities to feed people well, building up the infrastructure now for the future, and wanting Nantucket to be able to sustain itself in the long run, care for the land, conserving the resources. Someone said, I want to see farmers doing really well, and I want to grow a lot more food for the community. So in closing, I think there's so much incredible potential. I'm so grateful to have had all these wonderful conversations with so many of you. And next I'm gonna hand it off to my colleague, John. John is our president and CEO of American Farmland Trust. He also happens to be from Nantucket. And I hope you will all join me in a nice warm welcome for John.
It's a real pleasure to be here. As Jamie just mentioned, well, first off, I should just say, Jamie is one member of almost 300 staff at AFT, and I'm always just impressed by the incredible combination of capability, talent, and passion that the staff at this organization has, and it's really an honor to have a chance to work with them. You heard that I attended Nantucket High School. I attended Cyrus Pierce Middle School prior to that. And I've spent a lot of time as a youth in this building. The last time I was here was in 2015. I gave a presentation here, and it was just before I took the job as the president of American Farmland Trust. I was here wearing my hat as someone from Maine talking about agriculture in New England. And I'll tell you, I do a lot of public speaking. I'm generally pretty comfortable with it. But there's something about being on this island that always adds to the challenge. And part of it is I have to talk a little bit about my past and my life to make it real. And so it can't be a canned speech. Everything I say here is always a one-off, and you'll notice that in the slides. They're not that organized. But 9 years ago when I was here, I had 4 of my former high school teachers in the audience. Talk about intimidating. So I'm glad there's none here now. That's good. But I do have a dear old friend here, and that's Alan Reinhardt. I think many of you probably know Alan. What you may not know is that many, many years ago, Alan ran one of the bike shops then on the island, Snow Cycle Shop, and I worked for him for 7 summers. and they were incredibly formative years. You hired me when I was 14 years old. I don't know why, and I learned so much for you, and I thank you so much for all you did for me and all I know you've done for this island, so thank you, Alan. My family was from Boston. We took our family boat down here in the summer of 1971 when I was 10 years old and had an absolutely fantastic time. Shortly thereafter, my father died suddenly and tragically. And my mother, looking for escapism, picked up the family and moved us to Nantucket. And it's hard to explain what then happened, but it will sound a little bit like the storyline of a sentimental movie. You know, those Disney movies, right? When the new kid moves into town, and there's some issues of acceptance and all of that, but finally, through some shared struggle and wonderful experiences, everything works out great. And that was kind of my life. As a preteen and a teenager on Nantucket. And it did work out great in many ways, including the way which is evidenced by this photograph. This is me in the center. I had reached the pinnacle. I was a co-captain of the football team. There was no greater honor in Nantucket High. I think many of you know who this man to the left is, the famous coach Vito Capizzo, perhaps the winningest coach in Massachusetts football history. And some of you may recognize this man on the far left. That's Norman Moore. If you've ever had auto body work done down on Sparks Avenue, you probably brought your car to Norman. He looks a little different now. But anyway, that's when I knew I had arrived. I'd made it. But I do want to talk a little bit about my past on Nantucket because it truly informs who I am and the work that I've been doing professionally now for 35 years. And I could talk about many things that happened with me when we came down to this island, but I'm going to focus on two. We moved when we came here to a house on the Pulpus Road at basically the end, what was then the end of the moors. And I was a shy suburban kid who was hurt and struggling from the death of my father. And I spent an inordinate amount of time walking in the moors, walking amongst the bayberry and the rugosa and the scrub pine and the pitch pine, scrub oak, I should say, and the pitch pine. And I became a lover of the natural environment, and it changed me forever. In the 8th grade, I was invited to participate in an environmental science program at the UMass Field Station at Quays. That led to original research I got to do on fiddler crabs and then on bay scallops. That led to me being able to take college-level ecology courses through UMass and then participate in a science program at Hui, all while I was a high school student. An incredible, incredible opportunity that this island afforded me. The second thing I want to talk about has nothing to do with the natural environment, and even though it was so important for me to learn that love, what really inspired me, what really I took away, was a lesson in people and in community. And that has really made a huge, huge difference. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. My mother remarried when I was on the island to a 6th-generation islander. Great guy I was very fond of. He taught me all the important stuff. He taught me how to drive a stick. He taught me how to skin a deer. He taught me how to shuck scallops. He taught me how to rake for quahogs. He taught me where the best spot on the clam flats on Pulpus Harbor were. You know, all the really important things. But sadly, Byron was an older man, and he died when I was in high school. So when I went off to college, my mother, I wasn't there much. I was in Boston most of the time. Her husband was dead. She moved back off island. And my mother sold our house on the island. She sold her house for $125,000. This was just before the real estate took off. Now, this was a 4-bedroom home on over an acre of land with pond frontage. I think you all have some idea of what that property is worth now. Maybe 50 times what it was worth then. It sold later in the 1980s for 20 times what my mother sold for it. Now it's only money, and I've gotten over that. Really, I have. I note this for 2 other reasons. First, just to make it clear how fast things can change. And second, I want to point out what is probably the obvious, which is that if you're not part of that market, if you're not bought in, there's no chance getting in. And I've reflected on the 49 members of my high school graduating class, and I was the rare exception, right? I was the guy from away, but pretty much everyone else was from multi-generation island families, and a lot of them could never afford to come home. I spent portion of a summer after my mother sold the house, maybe 2 years, 3 years later, when we were in the middle of that real estate bubble in the 80s. I was visiting friends on the island. It was during the summer between college and graduate school for me, and I had a eureka moment. It dawned on me that rural places do one of 2 things. They either wither on the vine and become economic ghost towns, or they become hip and trendy and overpriced. But either way, the opportunities for local people who want to be here and make a life are diminished, if not eliminated. And I decided that that was going to be the focus of my career. I was going to focus on sustainable development. Sustainable rural development of the right kind at the right level that would enable people like me and some of my schoolmates to be able to live in a place that they cared about and make a life there. Now, I was just finishing up graduate school. I had met in college the woman I'd end up marrying. She's from rural Vermont. Same things going on there at this time. Nantucket had an extra 0 or 2, perhaps, on the end of some of the real estate prices, but the same phenomenon. And we were determined to make a new start somewhere where I could pursue this dream. Susan was just finishing up a physician assistant degree. She was eager to practice rural medicine, and I wanted to pursue this dream of sustainable rural economic development. We targeted Maine, in part because that's where my family was, a couple of my sisters at this point, and where both my parents had roots. And also because I thought it was a place where it was realistic to pursue this dream. And we ended up moving to a fairly poor, very rural part of central Maine. And I got involved in local affairs. Understandably, that was part of what I wanted to do. And a few years in, I found myself co-chairing the planning committee with a local dairy farmer. And after he had sized me up, as probably only an old New England dairy farmer can, and realized I wasn't that bad, he said, "John, you say you care about rural economic development and you know absolutely nothing about farming." And he was right. I love food. I'm from a family of cooks. We always had a garden. My stepdad, Byron, was a fantastic gardener. And he grew up on a farm on Nantucket that his grandparents had run. So food was very important, but I ascribe to the view that pretty much everyone did back 40 years ago in New England, which was farming here was something people did until they found soil out west. And the only people who still farmed were the folks who couldn't do anything else. That was the general conventional view of so many people. And economic development in all 6 New England states was built around that premise. No one cared about agriculture. Well, this gentleman, Dick Perkins, who took me under his wing, he became my mentor. And I had my second eureka moment. I've only had 2 in my life now, but this was the second one. And it was that I realized that if I was serious about sustainable rural development, it had to include sustainable agriculture. It was the thing that was literally grounded in communities. It's a thing that couldn't be picked up and moved elsewhere. It was critically important. And I had been pursuing my dream of economic development in Maine. I had worked for Maine's premier community development organization, doing all sorts of stuff, none of them ag-related. And I went to my boss and I said, I want to work on ag. And he said, you're crazy. And I said, I'll raise all the money for it and all the overhead. Hold on to me for 2 years so I don't have to go out and create a new organization, and then we can spin it off. He said, fine. Under those terms, fine. 2 years later, the Maine Farms Project was 15% of this organization's budget. We had about 20 staff, and we were doing great work. And I went to my boss and I said, time to spin off? And he said, no way. So this was about 35 years ago, and this was this is where I found my life's work. And it was really driven by the experiences that I had had on this island and how it had awakened me to the need for sustainable rural development. And of course, my farmer friend, who I saw as recently as last summer, Dick Perkins, and his inspiration to move me in a new direction. I've been blessed in my career with what I've been able to work on with some incredibly capable partners. We began in Maine by helping larger commodity farms, which were struggling, convert to direct markets. We ended up helping hundreds of new farmers get on land. We recognized the challenges with development, and Maine had never had a program of farmland protection, so we went to the organization that basically created this field, American Farmland Trust. They helped us found a Maine-based organization called Maine Farmland Trust. I ran that for a number of years. It was an incredibly satisfying experience to really turn around the Maine economy and turn around our political process to recognize agriculture as a potential economic driver. Incredibly satisfying. And then, not too long ago, and I've been remiss on my slides here, then not too long ago, 8 years, seems like yesterday, I was tapped to head up American Farmland Trust. And what an honor. AFT really literally created this field of conservation agriculture. This is not the time to give us, get into details on the origin story here. There's a lot, but I do want to hit some highlights of what we've done and how it relates back to the work here on Nantucket. So AFT, as you heard from Jamie, was founded 40 years ago now, and it really had an outsized impact, perhaps because it was the first organization that really tried to think of environment and agricultural issues as two sides of the same coin. Those two communities they're still at odds at times, but they were really butting heads in the 70s. And the founders of AFT said, no, there's got to be a better way. And so perhaps because we were the first player in the space, perhaps because of the quality of the people who were originally involved, perhaps because of luck, I don't know. But we had from almost the beginning an outsized impact. In 1981, as part of the Farm Bill, we incorporated the Farmland Protection Policy Act. Soon thereafter, good to our word, we pulled together a coalition that exists this day called the Conservation Coalition of Agriculture and Environmental Organizations, and that led directly to the passage in 1985 of the conservation title of the Farm Bill. Now, I don't expect any of you to know about or necessarily care about the details of federal agricultural policy. So I'll give you the summary. All the good stuff is in the conservation title. All the things that you hear about in agricultural policy that gets you frustrated are in other places. The conservation title is the money for land protection and the money that cost shares with farmers to do the right things by their land. And there's an alphabet soup of Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, EQIP, ASEP. Every single one of those programs, AFT played a pivotal role in establishing. We also helped establish farmland protection programs, purchase of agricultural conservation easements, what we call PACE programs. We helped establish those in 29 states. We also helped establish dozens of land trusts across the country, like Maine Farmland Trust, the one that I worked on. We just provided assistance, sometimes funding. It was to elevate and do better work rather than to hold it to American Farmland Trust itself. Current use taxation programs. You're familiar with the farmland and open space programs in Massachusetts, I'm sure. There was a time when Massachusetts was the first that had those programs. It was pushed by Fred Winthrop, Commissioner of Massachusetts, under Governor Dukakis, one of AFT's founders. All 50 states have those programs now. They make a huge difference in helping keeping farmers on the land. And finally, planning efforts. We have been actively involved with dozens of communities to model the way from Lexington, Kentucky to Walla Walla, Washington, and I can go on about the work we've done in helping local entities do better planning to incorporate agriculture. So what have been the outcomes of all of this? Well, for farmland protection, 8 million acres permanently protected in the last 43 years. Probably 300 million acres of farmland that receive some form of protection through current use taxation or because of improved zoning that recognizes agriculture. That's significant. That's about over a third of the farmland in America. Practices, we've helped primarily through federal policy elevate better practices on tens of millions of acres of land. And people, the third part of our mission, the farmers and ranchers, the stewards of the land. We have probably worked with 600,000 farm families over 43 years. We'll be working with about 30,000 this coming year. But as they say in politics, what have you done for me recently? So if you look a little deeper at AFT's more recent contributions, the biggest one is that we have really elevated the conversation around agriculture as a climate solution. I suspect, given this audience, you're very aware that good farming practices build soil health, build organic matter. Where's that coming from? Remember your high school chemistry. If you're building the organic matter, it's carbon, it's coming from somewhere, it's coming from the atmosphere. We teed this up with Congress in a big way starting in 2018, and it's worked. Congress 2 years ago passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. It was ostensibly a climate bill. It included $20 billion for the standard conservation programs that are in the Farm Bill, above and beyond the funding that was already there. This is a huge amount of money. 20 billion maybe doesn't sound like a lot compared to maybe transportation expenditures or things like that. But the conservation title of the Farm Bill, over 38 years, from 1985 to the present day, has funded about $100 billion worth of better farming practices. In one fell swoop, over 3 years, another $20 billion. If you do the math, it's about a 3-time increase on top of what had been done. But more important than the amount of money is the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act was a climate bill. And what Congress did by including that $20 billion for agriculture was to say definitively something they had never even been willing to hint at before, which is that these practices can be a viable climate solution. Huge stuff. We've also been involved with $4 billion of very innovative program. When I say $4 billion, we don't get that money. That's money that's flowing out to the producers to do better work through a climate smart program that USDA has launched. This administration, I don't mean to get political, but this administration has taken transformational steps to advance agriculture. There's been nothing like it since the 1985 Farm Bill. Nothing. But they have a hard time moving this money into the hands of farmers and ranchers. If you're one of the farmers here, you know how difficult it is to get someone from the Natural Resource Conservation Service on your farm. They are so understaffed. So what have they done? They have reached out to one non-governmental organization in America, us, to help assist that. We will be hiring and putting on the ground staff in 34 states this year to help make sure that money is spent well and wisely and the services to farmers increase. And then finally, we've always been engaged in active research, and I'm going to point out a couple of things very briefly, just dive deep on one of those areas so you get a sense of it. We use research not for research's sake. We use it to drive policy and action. Sometimes it's to convince Congress that this is the right direction. Sometimes it's to provide the data that a local community like Nantucket needs so it can make good decisions. So that's the kind of research I'm talking about. I mentioned earlier planning for agriculture. It's really hard to work with all the communities across this country, and we never could or will, right? But we have worked with several hundred, and we've learned incredible lessons from that. This is a book that is literally being published this month, entitled Planning Sustainable and Resilient Food Systems. It's going to be an incredibly valuable tool for communities like Nantucket that are trying to move in the right direction. That's one example. Another example has to do with our research on land use. Jamie alluded to it earlier in her presentation. For 5 years, we've been undertaking the most comprehensive study that's ever been done on agricultural land use in this country. It's called Farms Under Threat. It's had multiple different reports. And they dealt with the climate impacts, they dealt with how smart growth can change things, go on and on. I'm just going to hone in on the underlying piece of the first report, which was a clear and very specific and accurate number of the amount of acres of farmland we are losing in this country. And that figure is 2,000 acres a day. That's 750,000 acres a year. Does that bother anyone here? It bothers me. I hope it bothers you. There is some good news in here. The good news is that when AFT was created 40 years ago, that figure was almost 4 times higher. So we have, through these programs that I've talked about, made a difference. But the stakes are higher, and as we lose farmland, more of the remaining farmland is that much more important. So it's too high a number. Nonetheless, I do hear from some people saying, well, you know, we're America, we're a developed nation. We grow all this corn for ethanol. We have a lot of people who eat meat that don't need to. Do we really need all that farmland? We cannot view this in an isolated fashion as a single country. America sits on 10% of the arable land on this planet. This is a global resource that we have responsibilities for. So I sometimes want to think about land differently than other people. Most people want to think about, do we have enough land to grow our food? And that's short-sighted. There's a whole range of other products that we need land for. Some of you may be hearing about sustainable aviation fuel or bioplastics. It's a big part of our future that will help us get off carbon. But beyond that, farming done right, as I alluded to earlier, can provide so many critical environmental services, including carbon capture, water recharge, biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So I sometimes turn the question of, well, maybe we don't need all that farmland around and say, you know, we don't really know how much we want or need in the future because we've never looked at the question from the right perspective of not just growing our food, but all these other things that are critical for our future. And I want to stress how this is a complicated issue because this is a complicated system. The issues of land and practices and who's going to use that land and farm that land are interconnected. I'm briefly just going to explain some of those interconnections and why it's so complicated. When we have farmland, think about it. If you lose an acre, you lose the ability of that land to be farmed in a way that can provide not only food, but these other critical environmental services. That's bad enough. But with every acre of land you lose, you put additional pressure on the remaining acres to be used more intensely for food production, because you still have that need for food. In system dynamics, we refer to this as a downward spiral, right? A negative reinforcing cycle. So this is just a point of how these things are interrelated, the land itself and the practices. What about the people side? Well, it's fine to say if we have enough land and we're following good practices, everything will be hunky-dory. But you need people to do that work. You need the next generation of farmers, and it's a hard, hard way to make a living with a lot of barriers, particularly for incoming farmers. Nantucket, of course, with the cost of land and the like, is that much more extreme. So I've painted a picture that talks about some major challenges that are before us and a need to look at all this from a broad systems perspective. This can be overwhelming. But what does it mean? What can we do to address these kind of things? Well, as someone who has worked with very, very small farms, as someone who has worked with planning boards on very small steps, and somebody who has also worked on global issues and national agricultural policy, I think I see the whole spectrum. And the answer is, we need to work on multiple levels. We need to engage actively in so many different ways. What you are doing here on Nantucket by reinvigorating local farming and thinking about broader food system issues is critically important. It has to be done locally. The work begins here and is so important at this level. But at the same time, you need here in Nantucket to fit what you're doing into a bigger picture, to fit it into American agricultural policy, or there's not going to be the support for your farmers that you need from USDA. To fit it into good data so you understand how you're using your limited resources in the most important and strategic ways. To realize how what you are doing can make a difference, not just here, but to this planet. So that's the beauty of this. It's also the challenge, right? It connects on so many different levels. So I'm rambling here. This always happens when I come to the Atheneum. I don't know why. But I'll try to hone it down and finish up by saying this. To me, it's not as complicated as this sounds. It's actually pretty simple. It's all about taking something that you love and care about and elevating it to the next level. I don't know most of you in this room, but I think I can safely say that everyone in this room cares deeply about this place. It's magical. It's special. I know from how it healed a hurting kid. But all of you know that Nantucket Island is an amazing place. Now, you may be frustrated with it on any given day, given the traffic or some of the people or some recent development, or you may long for, well, it was better 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or in my case, 50 years ago. But at heart, it is still a place we all love. How wonderful this world would be if every community in America had champions like that for it. Fantastic. Think of so many of our difficulties and problems that would be removed if we had that same commitment to home that people in this room have to this place. Then, what do I mean by elevate it? Well, it's in part elevate your giving to local organizations, become a member of AFT, all of those things. If you want to give us $10 million, we can wisely spend it. We have plenty of important things to do. I'd do it myself if my mother hadn't sold that house. But I don't have that opportunity anymore. That's part of elevating it. But what I really mean by elevating it is let's remember that home that we care about is not just your hometown or where you might summer. It is our planet. So I ask you to recognize the critical importance of working locally in a global context. And I know I am sharing a positive view for what agriculture can be with all of you because you're here and part of these amazing organizations. I feel so privileged to have the opportunity to address you. Thank you for welcoming me home.
Yeah, we have about 5 to 10 minutes for questions. In the back. Yep, we have some roving mics.
Hey, my name's Tobias. I'm just curious, on a national level, what's like the most awesome new farming thing that's happening that you're just like, wow, this is just so cool?
You should have been at the garden club this morning because Bianca, right here, one of our all-star scientists on the AFT team, talked about a lot of things, but she focused in particular on biochar. And biochar is an area of incredible opportunity. For those of you who don't know what biochar is, I should be quiet now and turn it over to Bianca, but I'm going to mess it up, and hopefully not too bad. Biochar is this phenomenal way of taking wood residue and using it to trap carbon and put atmospheric carbon back in the soil in a way that also has all these additional great benefits of building soil health. So it's kind of a double win. You can directly sequester atmospheric carbon, stored for 1,000 years or so in the soil, while you're building soil health and improving the ability of more generally undertaken agricultural practices to be even that much more effective. So that's something big that's happening. But that's just part of this whole range of phenomenal. I use the word transformational, and I don't think that's the wrong term. It's really under the radar screen, but between the Inflation Reduction Act and the Climate Smart Commodities Partnership Program, there's $24 billion going towards really great work. That's money that flows to farmers and ranchers. And it's incredibly exciting. It is a sea change.
Hi, my name is Ben Turner. I'm a first-generation farmer based out of Loudoun County, Virginia. I'm lucky enough to be up here to see you speak. But I am currently trying to transition 200 acres of conventionally farmed land to organic. It's a big undertaking. I'm doing it chunks at a time, but I need help, and I'm looking for people, farmers, who are willing to help me in that transitionary process. Right now, we lease out that property to conventional soy, corn, and cattle. That helps us keep the property tax costs down. I would love for the people helping us do that to be organic farmers and to give them a chance to access land. I just don't know how to go about that, so I would love some advice.
Did you say Pennsylvania?
Loudoun County, Virginia.
Oh, Virginia.
Yep, about an hour southwest of Washington, D.C.
Okay, all right, great. We have a very strong Virginia program. We'll put you in touch with our Virginia Regional Director, and we're doing some really good work there, and I think we could directly help you.
Thank you.
Go for it, Matt.
Hey, Jamie.
Hey.
Beyond national policy, what are some of the best examples you've seen of What are some of the best examples you've seen of community programs that support building up farming?
It's all over the map. I mean, the beauty of community stuff is it can be designed to work for that place, right? So there are a lot of examples of communities helping with farmland access in one way or another. It could be purchasing land and making it available, not too dissimilar from some of the things that are being done here. It could be a different tax structure for that land. There are communities that have developed their entire economic development model around farming. Bodenham, Maine is an example of that. And it's so accepted now in the community that the businesses we want to grow are farms, that it sort of trickles down into everything that occurs in that community. There are communities, models like the CSA, which has originally been a farm to consumer thing. There are communities that have helped enhance that by having community food hubs or aggregation centers that allow CSAs to work a lot better and bring together product from multiple farms. So the list is endless, and this book will provide some of those answers.
Can't wait to read that. Other questions?
I'd be interested in hearing from the Nantucket farmers that are here, what they feel their greatest challenges are, and what the community can do. I don't know how much the community can do, but what they feel their greatest challenges are.
Hey, Larrabees, I'm looking at you. Bianca, can you hand it right there? We'll just hand it around. And if I got anything wrong, please correct me, because I was trying to summarize a lot, so don't hold back.
Infrastructure costs have been very hard to undertake. I mean, we're looking at pretty much our entire lease to pay off the infrastructure we had to put in for the farm.
Yeah, is that mic on?
Infrastructure costs, we're looking at pretty much the entire lease to pay off the infrastructure costs for what we can bring in farming on the property. That's definitely been one of the hardest ones.
Are you getting any USDA support right now?
We are. We're working with NRCS to put in some wells and get irrigation. But getting some quotes from local companies, NRCS can't supply us with enough funding to even come close to justifying pursuing. So it's an internal debate that my dad and I are constantly having on what is worthwhile and what do we just say we can't take it.
Do you want to add anything? No? Okay. Wait, hold on. We got a couple more farmers here. Hold on. Dan, do you want to share anything? No? Aiden?
Hi. You haven't mentioned anything about chemicals, neonicotinoids, organophosphates, glyphosate, imidacloprid, chlorpyrifos, all these things, the chemical companies. What are you doing about that? Or is there anything anybody can do about that?
It's a very challenging question. We try very hard at AFT to not villainize any farmer. We believe that the vast majority of farmers are trying to do what's right by the land. Sometimes they feel trapped and have to follow certain practices because if they don't, they feel next year's crop is going to fail, they'll go out of business, whatever. So our view, without villainizing, without saying that that's bad per se, is to show them the positives of other practices. And it's a long process. We've been at this for many years, and we obviously have a lot further to go. But I think it's improving. And if you focus on the fundamentals, if you focus on things like soil health, it becomes very clear that if you use a lot of chemicals, use a lot of herbicides, you're hurting the underlying structure of the soil on which your farm depends. Those things also cost a lot of money. And one of the very viable strategies for farmers to do better is for them to reduce the cost of those inputs. So it makes sense on economic grounds, it makes sense on environmental grounds. There's an incredible complex system of social reasons, from the age of farmers to who they get their advice from, often equipment dealers and the sellers of these inputs. There's complicated social reasons that make these barriers, but we're working on that. We have a pretty large research team, but it's only been recently that in addition to the agronomists and the soil scientists, we've been adding social scientists because we realize that part of our challenge is changing those kind of behaviors.
We'll take a couple more, and I wish we had like another hour, but I do know the staff here do need to get home, and we are supposed to be done at 8, which it almost is, and I want to give everyone a chance to also peruse the resource table that's in the far corner and take home lots and lots of stuff. So we'll take maybe 2 more, and then we'll wrap.
I'm a local farmer.
Right into the mic, please.
Sorry, very nervous. Local farmer. I got established here with a horse, came to Nantucket, went out on a private farm. The owner came to me and asked, I'd like to get it put into agriculture. So they had the name Nantucket Creamery trademarked because they had purchased some property. So I bought goats. I'm a goat herder. Very successful at breeding. He's recently passed away, so I'm really looking for help to team with other people. So the infrastructure, I agree with the Larrabees. I've done that part. But the other part is getting help. And, you know, that's where I need part team as well. Getting help with losing their housing, and then putting in a creamery. That's a very expensive thing. So looking to make cheese if anyone's interested. Thank you. And I love the char.
That's great. And Posey, I did see online that the Ag Commission has been recently revived. Is that fair to say? So you have an AgCom that hadn't met for a while that is now meeting, and so that could be a place. As you all know, Ag Commissions exist to advocate for farmers and agricultural issues on the island, so that might be a place to take it. Another recommendation I had made when I was here last was, you know, whether it's an informal group of farmers getting together more or more of a food council style of organization that a lot of communities have, coming together to really brainstorm like that and say, hey, I have this need. Does anyone else, you know, want to help with goats or have a creamery with me? More of those conversations and dialogue, I think, is really, really important. Okay, we'll take one more. Sarah in the back.
Thank you all. I invited Bianca to come speak at the Garden Club this morning, and then we have everybody staying in my guest house, except for John and his wife. But one of the most powerful things, and I have an organic farm in upstate New York, which is real organic certified, so I'm completely into biochar and all this stuff. But one of the things that was so powerful for me this morning in Bianca's lecture at the Garden Club was really the farmer, Gray, John Gray, Joe Gray, and sort of going to these farms and saying, if you change over to these no-till and cover cropping, the increase in income and output from the farms is so great. So one of the fears for a lot of farmers is like, I'm going to lose a lot of income in the interim before I can get out of it. But the incredibly short time it takes for a farm to regenerate when you're using these practices that are regenerative to the soil health. It was very impactful for me to hear that tonight. And it's not a question, but I think it's some very powerful, a very powerful message for you guys to really impart on us who farm and grow our own food.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Sarah. There's amazing progress that can be made very quickly with some of these practices. Others take time, just like everything in life. But there's such hope here. There's such opportunity, and we just need to seize it. I think we're done, but I'm going to turn it back to Jamie in a moment. But I just wanted to follow up on one thing that was said earlier. You were listing some of the concerns you had. On Nantucket, we always like to think that our problems are unique. And they're sometimes a little different, or maybe they're exaggerated because of the economic realities or an island 30 miles at sea. But everything that I've heard from any farmer here is something I've been hearing from farmers for 35 years. So I just wanted to leave with the message that things are different here, and everything is the same here. And it just leads to the need for us all to work together.
I think we'll end it there. Thank you all.